What if I told you the United States almost collapsed? Not because of a war, not because of a foreign invasion, but because of one document, a piece of paper so flawed, so broken, that it nearly strangled the country in its cradle. This isn't some alternate history. This is the real story of the Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, and how it almost became its last. After the smoke cleared from the Revolutionary War, the newly independent American colonies faced a terrifying question. How do you build a nation from scratch without creating the very tyranny you just escaped? Their fear of kings, of powerful central governments, was bone deep. They had just thrown off the yoke of King George III, and the last thing they wanted was to create an American version of him. So, they went to the opposite extreme. They decided to create the weakest national government imaginable. In 1777, in the midst of war, they drafted a document designed to protect individual liberty above all else. That document was the Articles of Confederation. It was a declaration of freedom, but it would soon become a blueprint for chaos. So, what did this document actually do? Or, more accurately, what did it not do? On paper, the Articles of Confederation seemed like the ultimate safeguard of state sovereignty and individual rights. The federal government, then just a Congress, was given almost no real power. It could not collect taxes from the people. It could not regulate trade between the states or with other nations. It couldn't enforce its own laws, and perhaps most critically, it could not raise a national army. Each of the 13 states basically acted like its own independent country. They had their own militias, their own currencies, and their own trade policies. Congress could ask the states for money to pay for things, like the massive war debt owed to France, but the states could simply say, no. And they often did. There was no president to provide leadership. There were no federal courts to settle disputes. The government was designed to be powerless, a servant to the states. Freedom was protected? Yes, but order was completely gone. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Almost immediately, the new nation began to crumble under its own weight. The country was drowning in debt from the Revolutionary War, but since Congress couldn't tax anyone, it had no way to pay it back. To deal with their own debts, states started printing their own money. Soon, you had money from Virginia, money from New York, money from Pennsylvania, all with different values. Imagine trying to buy something today with a dozen different, competing currencies. It was chaos. Trade collapsed. Inflation exploded. The value of money plummeted. To make matters worse, states started treating each other like foreign rivals. New York put a tax on firewood coming in from Connecticut. New Jersey retaliated by taxing a New York lighthouse built on its shore. It was an economic civil war. The United States wasn't acting like a single nation. It was 13 squabbling neighbors building fences between their yards. And the rest of the world noticed. Foreign governments had no respect for this weak, divided country. Britain refused to abandon its military forts on American soil, as promised in the peace treaty. Spain closed the vital Mississippi River to American trade, choking the economic life out of Western farmers. The young, proud nation was weak, and everyone knew it. Then, in 1786, the entire fragile system came dangerously close to shattering completely. In western Massachusetts, farmers, many of whom were veterans of the Revolution, were losing their land. They were crushed by debt and high state taxes they couldn't possibly pay. Led by a former Continental Army captain named Daniel Shays, they took up arms. This was Shays Rebellion. They weren't just protesting. They were shutting down courts to prevent judges from foreclosing on their farms. They marched on government buildings. This wasn't a foreign enemy at the gates. This was Americans rebelling against their own government, just years after the Revolution had ended. And what could the national government do? Absolutely nothing. It had no money to intervene, no army to send, no power to restore order. The Massachusetts state militia eventually put down the rebellion, but the event sent a shockwave of terror through the nation's leaders. If a small group of angry farmers could bring a state to its knees, what would stop the entire country from spiraling into anarchy? The wake-up call was deafening. For the first time, leaders like George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton were forced to admit a terrifying truth. The Articles of Confederation were a catastrophic failure. They had swung the pendulum too far. In their quest to protect liberty from a strong government, they had created a government too weak to protect the nation itself. The very freedom they fought for was now threatened by chaos and disorder. Washington wrote that the country was on the verge of anarchy and confusion. He and others realized that if something didn't change, and change drastically, the United States of America would not survive. It would fracture into 13 separate, weak republics, ripe for being picked off by the European powers they had just defeated. The grand experiment in self-government was about to end in failure. So, in the summer of 1787, a group of delegates from 12 of the 13 states gathered in Philadelphia. Their official, public purpose was simple: to meet and suggest revisions to the Articles of Confederation. But many of the key figures there had a secret, much more radical agenda. They weren't there to fix the Articles. They planned to throw them out entirely and start over. To ensure they could speak freely, they made a pact of absolute secrecy. The doors to the State House were locked, guards were posted. The windows were kept shut, even in the sweltering Philadelphia heat. For 4 long months, they debated, argued, and compromised. It was a battle of ideas: strong central government versus states' rights, national order versus individual freedom. How could they create a government with enough power to be effective, but not so much power that it became a tyranny? The document that emerged from that secret meeting was something the world had never seen before: the United States Constitution. It was a radical departure from the Articles. It created a strong federal government with 3 distinct branches. It established a president to lead the executive branch. It created a system of federal courts, topped by a Supreme Court. Critically, it gave the federal government the power to tax its citizens directly and the power to raise and maintain a national army. But it also created a brilliant system of checks and balances, a balance of power between the federal government and the state governments. Not everyone was happy. Many feared this new constitution gave far too much power to the central government, creating the very monster they had fought a revolution to destroy. But others, like Hamilton and Madison, argued that without it, America was doomed. The choice facing the states was stark: embrace this new, stronger framework, or watch the country collapse. In the end, the Constitution was ratified. It saved the United States. It provided the strength and structure necessary for the young nation to survive and eventually thrive. But it is crucial to remember that this world-changing document only exists because of the disastrous failure that came before it. The Articles of Confederation, written with the noblest of intentions to safeguard freedom, served as the ultimate lesson in what not to do. They showed America that without order, there can be no true liberty. The document that almost destroyed the nation ultimately became the reason for its salvation. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.